What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jordan and today we're going to be doing something pretty cool. We're going to be taking the rubber fuel lines that are stock in the DATSUN 280Z and swapping them out for nylon-braided AN lines. So stick around. Alright, so before we start the project, I'm going to go over all the different things that I bought to hopefully do this the most proper way possible. And it all started with a plan. Get a piece of paper, make a plan for how you're going to route all of these things in the engine bay. And after I did that, I realized that I needed a couple 45-degree bends, a couple 90-degree bends, a couple straight adapters. I also needed some adapters that were going to plug into the original hard lines. I got hard line cutters, a fuel filter, a hose cutter. And you know what, the hose cutter is really important because this line is strong and you need to be able to make a really nice clean cut so you don't have leaks. A leaky fuel system is definitely a bad thing, so get the hose cutters, make nice cuts. You're also going to want an AN wrench. This isn't a requirement, but this is going to help it so that you're not going to be scratching up your new fittings. Then you're also going to need a few extra fittings to plug into your fuel rail and your fuel pressure regulator. I'm going to put a link in the description down below of everything that I bought. Hopefully it helps you out. And with all that being said, let's get started. I know that the engine bay may seem a little bit complicated, but basically what happens is the gas comes from the back of the car, comes through to the fuel filter. From the fuel filter, it comes down to the fuel rail, through the fuel rail into the injectors, and then it goes back around to the fuel pressure regulator, which is also over here. So that's a lot of extra line we don't need. And then from the fuel pressure regulator, it will go back to the fuel tank for anything left over. So what we're going to do is we're going to be cleaning up all of that today, and it's a little bit of a process. So first thing you want to do to be safe is remove your battery. You don't want to have any surprise sparks when working on the fuel system, but that's the very first step. So now we're going to move into the disassembly part of the project. So we're going to start removing all of the rubber hosing. That includes this one, and all of the other hoses. Make sure you're labeling and keeping track of where each hose goes because we're going to need to reroute everything towards the end. I've got fuel literally everywhere, so make sure you open up your garage, get some good ventilation going, and keep trucking on. So underneath the car, I'm going to be cutting the fuel lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and do a little demonstration up here where it's easy to see because it's really, really tight down there and it's hard to see how this works. So this is a hard line cutter, and basically you twist this thing and it puts a little bit of pressure with a blade on it on the fuel line, and this is how you end up cutting a hard line wherever you want. So put a little bit of tension on here, and then all you do is just go like this. A little bit more, and just keep tightening, keep spinning, and there you go. A super clean, nice cut. So awesome tool, and this is what I'm going to do down there with the fuel rail, the fuel lines further up on the chassis. Off camera, I went ahead and cleaned up our fuel pressure regulator. I also added a new fitting here and two straight fittings on the side. And basically the way that this is going to work is we're going to attach it to the firewall somewhere around here, and we're going to run our AN line from there, that fitting, all the way here, and then the return line is going to go down. And so the advantage of this is just going to clean up the engine bay a little bit and remove some of the unnecessary tubing. And to mount it, we're going to use some riv nuts. If you haven't looked up a riv nut gun, check it out, super sweet, but basically it's going to add threads to the firewall and let us just screw it on there like it's supposed to be there. install is super clean, especially with those riv nuts. And you know, step by step, we're just cleaning up the engine bay. So when we finally go to paint everything, I want this to be as clean as possible. And now that the fuel pressure regulator is all mocked up, now we gotta mock up the fuel filter. So if we just take this, put it down here, it'll sit right here, and we have a 90-degree fitting right there that's gonna go up towards the engine. And we have a straight fitting that's gonna go back towards the main line. Once I get it installed right there, it'll be really nice and stealth. And off camera, I went ahead and mounted the fuel filter, which is right here. It's just a couple bolts and nuts on the other side. Super simple, but let's do a little overview before we take the next step. So the gas is gonna come through here from the bottom to the fuel filter, from the fuel filter to the fuel rail, from the fuel rail to the fuel pressure regulator, and back to the return. So now that you have all of your hard points mounted and everything's mocked up kind of in like a solid place, now we can just run our hoses. And that's what's next. So making the hoses and attaching the fittings is a whole nother thing, so let's get right into it. For this project, we're essentially going to be using two different types of fittings. This fitting is meant for adapting to a hard line that's already in the car. So the fuel lines that are made out of metal, that's what this one is for. And then this type of fitting, whether it's straight or curved like this one, is meant to go on an AN hose. So first we're gonna go over the hard line adapter, and it's really not that hard. People make these things out to be like it's high technology, but it's not. It's just a nicer version of a regular hose clamp. First, let's go over the hard line adapter. So basically when you unscrew this part, it comes in three pieces. You have this part which goes over the hard line like this. Make sure you get the proper size. There's many sizes of these things. Then this little grommet here, whatever you want to call this, I actually don't know what this is called. Put this over and it just barely fits. It should be a very snug fit. Then you kind of sneak this back in here and put this on here like that. And basically as you tighten these threads, it's going to give a very, very strong, tight press fit to this hard line. So basically you can take a hard line and adapt it to an AN line and eventually put it to an AN hose. So this is how you can take an old car and put AN lines inside of it. Next, we're gonna jump right on over to the regular AN line. This is what everyone's gonna be using if they're using only AN lines. And it's also really, really simple. So basically you take the hose, and when you cut it, you want to make sure you have some tape on here to make sure that the edges don't fray, because these edges will fray out and they won't be able to fit in. Basically, it's a very tight fit into here, and you twist this on, and eventually it's going to press into there about this far. And then once it's pressed up all the way to the point where it's supposed to be pressed, then you're gonna do the same thing you did the other one. You take this nozzle here and basically it's gonna go into the fitting, which is gonna go into the hose. And then you press them together and you twist it together, and the threads are gonna be pushing this fitting onto the hose. So essentially, once you're done, you just have two, either it's this kind or it's this kind, but it's just a very tight pressed fit. And that's it. That's AN lines in a nutshell. And like I told you guys earlier, it's really difficult to film the hard line stuff just because it's so tight and so dark down here. But essentially there's two more lines I need to do. I took the vent line and I bent it up this way. I capped it off. And then I have the main line, which is right here. I'm gonna be cutting that pretty short and putting on a straight adapter that's gonna lead over to the fuel filter right here. And then after that, I'm going to take the return line, which is the bottom line, and I'm gonna cut it very short. And I'm gonna put an adapter there and then also a 90-degree fitting to meet up with the fuel pressure regulator. So I'm gonna try and do a really clean install, but it's very hard to film just because it's so tight and dark down here. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick and show you guys the finished product. All right, so it was pretty difficult to get awesome images of me doing that, but basically this line right here is our main line that's gonna go over to the fuel filter right there, and then this one is our return line with the 90-degree fitting on it, and this 90-degree fitting is gonna go to the fuel pressure regulator. So now we just need to hook up our hoses, and we are in the final stretches. So to begin measuring my hoses, I'm actually just going to use some welding rod to help me do the measuring. You can use pretty much whatever you need, but just remember that when you're doing your measurements, the hose is going to stick into the fitting about that far. So you need to have a little bit of margin of additional hose to fit into the fitting. And also it's probably a good idea to over measure just a little bit, because too long is okay, but too short won't work. So let's get to measuring and cutting. So using the welding rod to help me mock up the length of the hoses ended up being a great idea, because I can basically just plug in the rod to the different fittings, and it'll even help me account for any curves that I might need, or if I want to tuck it in a certain direction. So you might need to use some wire if you don't have welding rod, but definitely a decent solution. And so I'm just going to demonstrate doing one of these. So let's do this one, because if I did all of them, it'd just be really repetitive. So I'm going to remove the fittings from these. And let's get to making some hoses. So I bought this hose off Amazon, and when you get it, it already comes with one side taped and cut. So now we got to figure out where we're going to do our next cut. And so I'm just going to lay this wire on here. And then at this point, I'm going to put some tape down, and you're going to wrap the tape around the hose. And the goal here is that this tape is going to help keep all these little woven strands together when you finally cut the hose. So tape it nice and tight, make sure it's got a good seat on there. Then we're going to take our wire again, and that's where our cut is going to be. And then from here forward, we're just going to chop it up and then have your hose. This is why you need to get these hose cutters, because that was so much easier than everyone on the internet said it would be. So, good news. Once you have your hose cut, you're going to want to remove the tape that you put on the edge of it, but the nylon braiding on the outside is going to fray a little bit. That's okay, but you don't want it to fray too much, so try and do your best to take it off gently. There are going to be leftover strands, so I like to use snips and trim off the little edges as best I can. It's not going to be perfect, but you want to try and get it as clean as possible. And then you're going to want to take the hose portion off of your fitting, put it face down on the table. I like to put my AN wrench on there first. Put the hose in there, try and get all the fibers in there if you can. Kind of massage it in there, make sure everything fits in. And then as you press down, we're gonna rotate the AN wrench and push as hard as you can down and keep rotating. And you'll notice that it'll start to seat down in there. And so, like I said before, it's hard to see on camera, but you want to make sure that the hose is fully pressed down until it reaches these fine threads, because there's coarse threads on this side and fine threads on this side. So you want the hose to be all the way pushed down in there. If you see frayed edges on the outside, right here, if there's frayed edges poking out, this is what's happening. So you want to avoid this. You want to make sure you have a really clean seat on the inside there, and this looks good. So now we'll move on to the next step. I like to use a little bit of tape, and this is going to help grip on the hose as we go to our further steps. So put it on there nice and clean, and then the next piece of tape is going to go on the fitting itself. And this is going to do two things. This is going to protect the fitting from your regular wrench, and it's also going to hold the fitting and the hose together. Because what happens is when you put the other side of the fitting in here and you start tightening it down, it tends to pull the metal fitting off of the hose. So by applying this tape, it gives you a way of holding these two things together without doing it with your hands, which is really helpful. Once you have that done, take the other side of your fitting. We're going to put a little bit of WD-40 on there. Stick it in the end of the fitting, kind of push it in there, get it hand started so that way the threads start to grab. And then once the threads start grabbing, go ahead and take your regular wrench and then take your AN wrench, and then we just got to tighten. So you don't have to tighten it down all the way, but get it pretty close to being all the way. And then from there on, we're just gonna remove the tape. And there you go. There's a clean fitting right there. One down, 3 to go.
2,000 years later.
All right, and the last fitting going on. Boom. It all fits, looks good, super happy with the turnout. Look how nice that goes around. And then going down towards the bottom of the car, we got the fittings just looking super clean. So you think we're done, right? Nope. We gotta do one more thing. We gotta pressure test the system because like I said before, a leaky fuel system is not a good thing. So let's head on over to my friend Randy's house. He's got some pretty cool cars and he also has a little system to help us pressure test things and make sure that there's no leaks. So stick around because we're gonna check out his cars and he's gonna help us out. All right, Randy, you want us to run us through how we pressure test the AN hoses?
Sure, so what we have here is a Schrader valve fitting that's installed on this. You want to torque these down as you would with any AN fitting. So for a Dash 6 like this, if you don't have a way to actually measure torque, what you do is you find the flat surfaces, torque it until it's about one of the flats over or 1.5 flats over. So that'll be a nice tight fitting on there. Then what we do is we take our air compressor. You want to pressurize this to about the level that the car will experience on wide open throttle. So 280Z idles at about 43.5 PSI fuel pressure. You want to add to that to make sure that when you're at wide open throttle and the vacuum brings the pressure up, that you're not leaking out under those circumstances. So we're going to pressurize it to about 60 or 70 PSI. If you're running boost, obviously go a little bit beyond that. So we take our compressor, pressurize the hose, and then what we do is we submerge it in water and then watch it for about a minute to look for new air bubbles coming out of it. When you first submerge it, the nylon here is going to have some air bubbles trapped, so don't be alarmed by any of that. You're looking specifically for leaks at the fittings after all the original air bubbles have come off. All right, so it's been sitting for about a minute. We haven't seen any new air bubbles coming out of it, so we can be pretty sure that this isn't going to leak any fuel on us. Last step is to release the air pressure and remove the Schrader valve.
All right, looks like we got a leak-free system, which is great. And Randy, I told them that I'd show them your cars, so
absolutely.
Let's get into that.
I wake up, flex, thumb down, now check. No drip, this wet. Tell them run it up. No sleep, no rest. Might crash, might wreck, but first I stretch. Tell them run it up. I wake up, flex, thumb down, now check. No drip, this wet. Tell them run it up. Don't make me greedy. The first one in, the last one out, can't call me lazy. Put in my hours, send the invoice and they pay me. I need 6 rings like MJ and Tom Brady.
All right, Randy, thanks for the help.
No problem, good luck.
Catch you later.
Yep.
All right, guys, so we are back in the garage. Got the tested AN fittings and lines, and everything seems to be good. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these back in the car. But just remember that when you do this, you just make these hand tight and then maybe a quarter turn more, not very much. These aluminum threads can't take a whole lot, so just be careful. But I'm gonna put these back in the car, put the battery back in the car, so let's do it. So we got the lines tightened up and torqued down. We've also got the battery plugged in, so let's go ahead and give it a try. It's probably gonna have to crank a little bit to pump gas into the lines, but should work. All right. I'm just gonna go ahead and check for leaks. Just visual inspection, see if we have any leaks. Well guys, I definitely think that this project was a success. My main objective was to get rid of the cracking rubber fuel lines, replace them with something durable and that looks good, and I think we accomplished that. The system looks really clean and I'm super happy with the way it looks, and also no leaks. So I hope this video taught you something, taught you how to make AN lines and how to do it safely and properly. If you liked the video, watching it or learning about these things, go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully we see you at the next one. But I gotta run.